Welcome, everybody, once again to the Life Shift Summit, from crisis to crushing it, for anyone in midlife, quarter life, or COVID life crisis, which, of course, is many people right now. So our goal in this summit really is to support people in shifting their perception. All of us shift our perception from one of like something terribly bad and wrong has happened to no, it's just the universe calling us forward to expand and stretch into the next greater, grander version of ourselves. That's really all that's happening. And whatever happened in the past happened. There were certainly many mistakes, but all of that was actually perfect to get us right here to where we are. It was our training. We're now like ready to just spread our wings and fly. And to the degree that we get that and we say yes, we can use this energy to slingshot ourselves forward. And to the degree that we don't, or we hold on to the old, it is going to get more and more painful, right? The old space is too small for us. We're ready to, step out and be the greater selves that we are. Okay, so that's our goal. We have a wonderful person with us today. His name is Joe Bernstein. He's a transformational life coach. He supports successful business owners, tech executives, high performers, and everyday leaders, and just regular dudes in letting go of overthinking and using stress as a motivator, and instead producing from a clear mind, open heart, and solid core. And can't we all use that, right? I know I can. So thank you for your work. Joe's life's mission is to create a world of love and liberation through transformative relationships, which I'm extremely interested in asking about, like what exactly is a transformative relationship relative to your work. So welcome, Joe.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I absolutely am excited to be here. When you reached out and even shared the title of what this summit is about, I was pumped because at the end of the day, that's some of my core story is about that. It's about going through a huge period in my early 30s of real crisis that became the catalyst for me to really transform my life and light my life on fire in the most positive ways. So I'm all about helping people with that. Thank you for putting this together and having me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So why don't we start there? Why don't you just take a minute and give us a brief overview of how you got into the work that you do? What happened?
Yeah. So I went through an extremely transformative experience, transformative time in my life. I'm a guy who grew up with all the privilege you could imagine, but in a very emotionally volatile home. And one of the things I learned in that home is time and money are extremely scarce, and that love and relationship and parenting was full of stress and bickering and control and just emotional pain and challenge. So I created very limited beliefs for myself for what I could do and accomplish, for what I could have when it came to love and relationship. I have learning disabilities, and I'm a very non-academic, non-traditional learner. So I just kind of thought I was dumb and would never be successful in college. Therefore, I wouldn't have much of a career. But, even with all those negative beliefs about my potential and who I was, I somehow found myself in my late 20s, married to someone I was really passionate about, in a 10-year career that I loved and I was very successful at. And really in a life that was very good on so many levels, even though I was still hedging and playing small and living in fear. And part of my story is that me and my whole family growing up used food and consumption of media and TV to really numb out our pains, numb out our struggles, to not understand our emotional landscape. And so I was overweight or obese from probably 3 years old in my teens. I was
Really?
well over 3.
You do not look like a guy who was overweight.
Yeah. So what happened, I know people tell me that all the time, but I was up and down over 300 pounds in high school. I didn't date
Wow.
much. I wasn't that successful in school. I pretty much flunked out of college, but I found myself in this retail career for a company I loved. And I also found myself at 25, 340 pounds. Over time,
What are you now?
I'm about 175, 180.
Wow.
I've been doing a little bit of a
That's like
gut healing protocol, so I'm a little
that's like
lighter
half
than
the
normal.
weight that you were.
Yeah, pretty much, right? And
Amazing.
and that's a big part of my transformational story is taking off the weight, but I had already given up on diets 10, 20 years earlier. I'd given up on
Yeah.
diets when I was 10, 11 years old after I'd been through them. So I lost a bunch of weight naturally without doing crazy exercise and crazy,
What's
eating
naturally mean?
protocols.
Can I ask you a
But
question? Like, what does
yeah,
that mean naturally? Because I'm sure a lot of people I hear you,
yeah,
not that we want to have this conversation be about weight loss. However,
no,
many
no,
people are dealing with that. So
yeah,
what was the natural way that had you drop half
yeah,
your weight?
yeah. My former marriage had a lot of toxicity in it as far as how we related and what we created, but it had a lot of beauty. Um, she was very passionate about the environment. She was very passionate about animal welfare. She's very passionate about good food. So what happened was I learned the pleasures of enjoying the environment, enjoying outdoors, and enjoyed the pleasures of being a good steward to animals. So we ended up fostering dogs and ended up enjoying the outdoors and hiking and eating really well, better than I'd ever eaten in my life as far as quality. So when we started getting rocky, I had already lost about 80 pounds, just transforming my relationship to my own values.
Mm.
Then when we fell apart, when we broke apart very tragically and put me into crisis, one of my reactions was to really decide that I could understand and love my body for the first time and to really understand how to manage anxiety and mood and energy with food and exercise. And that launched into the next 60, 70, 80, 90 pounds of weight loss happening. I don't want to say without effort. It was a lot of effort. I was committed. I was excited. I saw for the first time in my life, I could have a really healthy, trim body. And I got really excited. So I was working out. I still work out 6 to 7 days a week. I still am really thoughtful about what food I eat and conscious of quantity and timing and macronutrient balance. But really, it was about understanding how to wrap my head around my emotions, my nervous system, and to really just believe that I was worthy of love and believe I was worthy of a great career and believe that I was someone who was attractive and valuable no matter my weight. Then, I mean, the behaviors that come from those beliefs, from that orientation to life, that's what happened. Weight just shed, and it's been, again, not effortless, but easeful to keep it off for about 8 years now.
Yeah, that's
Without
amazing.
diets and without, I don't do CrossFit or crazy gym workouts. I've used personal trainers just to learn here and there, and then I do my own thing. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that's
so that's a
amazing.
big part of the transformation is the body transformation, but it was really about love and it's really about my own value in the workforce and what I believed I could create professionally.
Yeah, yeah. No, my friend and mentor Marianne Williamson has a book called "The Course: A Course in Weight Loss," and it's really the book is about self-love. And
Yeah,
as you start to self-love and accept yourself, the body naturally responds to that. You make different choices naturally. Yeah, and that's sort of what I hear you saying. It's like,
yeah,
okay, it's self-love sheds the weight.
yeah. And
I
it was a
mean,
lot about this topic we're talking about today, which
yeah,
is which is liberation logic versus like a domination logic.
yeah, yeah.
I
Tell me
was
more about that. That's like something you mentioned. I love the concept. I think it's powerful. So let's hear about it.
Yeah. Well, let me first own that it's not my concept. I want to make sure that I'm
Yeah,
giving appropriate recognition. It really is a concept that comes from an amazing mind here in the DC area who has been an organizer for the movements of Black Lives, Aaron Goggins, um, someone he worked with, a woman named Rebecca Mintz. They did a training years ago that I took called Liberation Logic. It was really about social justice activism coming from a different lens, but everything I learned inside of it completely related to my work as a coach and my work as a transformational volunteer with Mankind Project and with men's work. It related to every part of my relationships in my life. It related to every part of my self-talk, and it just inspired me. They got a lot of those same concepts from collective liberation movements and movements for liberation of Black people in America, and a lot of feminist theory as well too. So I just want to credit them first. That's the most important thing for me. If I'm going to be using these amazing mental and spiritual technologies, we got to give it up to the owners
right.
of that, or the creators, I should say. And so basically, it's this idea that many of us, we create our life or we live our life based more in a domination logic, which is it's really about control and how we use power to control ourselves and others. Whereas liberation at the baseline is about setting something free, setting yourself free or another free. Domination is very much based in fear-based living and anxiety-based living, versus where liberation logic is really when we're creating solutions around possibility and around love and around abundance. And it's really a matter of, when we're talking about internal domination logic, you thinking we can use all willpower and we can use all these mindset tricks and tools, including very slick and sly spiritual bypassing of shame and blame, or uses of shame and blame that sound very spiritual as shortcuts. It's really very much, domination is feeling stuck in victim or consumer consciousness around all the beliefs and theories and the ways that we were trained as young people, and the ways we've been trained as employees a lot of the time to kind of bow down to some sort of greater force that makes all the rules and sets the standards and decides what's right culturally, decides what values are right, where liberation is really deciding, okay, I'm coming from self-love, I'm coming from creativity, I'm coming from mindfulness, I'm coming with experimentation as a mindset, I'm moving towards some version of self-mastery rather than just using willpower and quick fixes. It's really about long-term orientation and being in like a deep, deep orientation of creation in your life, of responsibility and ownership and passion and excitement, rather than being motivated by like, resisting the things that we don't love about ourselves.
Right. So like if you're
to change. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me just jump in here a second. Like I relate to some of this in the work that I do, but so it's like if you're dominating, it's likely you're trying to avoid dominance from outside, right?
Absolutely.
So then you will dominate or attempt to dominate through either overtly or covertly through manipulation, different types of covert control. But you had mentioned something, and I know we're all involved in that. Like most people are walking around trying to avoid dominance, and so therefore they approach the world trying to dominate in some way. But you mentioned something about internal dominance and external. Like there's a way to we do that externally, but we also do it with ourselves, correct?
Right.
So tell me more about that, because you're saying rather than willpower is sort of like internal dominance, like trying to dominate yourself, force yourself to do something. What's the alternative?
Yeah. Well, I just want to make sure I clarify too. I don't know that willpower is a bad tool, but often in the lineage of change and transformation, especially in like dominant culture, willpower is the main tool, right? Willpower and shame and blame is the main tool. So it's a short-term tool at best that helps us through periods where it's time to start something or stop something, and we really need to rely on a sense of power. But essentially, the internal versus external domination logic, external domination would be when I think, here's a great example. I have clients that are very successful professionally usually, and they've done it somewhat effortlessly. And they've done it because they've learned to outshine other people. They've done it because they've learned to make sure to position themselves as having higher and more value than another person or than the competition, right? Even as coaches, like there's coaches that are afraid to interview other coaches or to promote other coaches and things like that, because we're afraid of competition being what we need. We need to dominate someone in competition. We need to be better than them. We do our best to position ourselves as smarter than them, quicker than them. We take credit for things that aren't necessarily ours. And I see that a lot. A lot of my clients are well-meaning, but they haven't even realized how they've used these types of domination strategies to get ahead very often. And in many ways, they've used people in like resources, because that is what we're shown and that's what we're taught. And so that's the external logic, but then they're doing that to themselves. They're also keeping themselves from thinking that, oh, I really deserve to ask my partner for this kind of thing or that kind of thing in the bedroom only when I've done well enough at work and only when I've worked hard enough, or I've earned my time, my downtime with my kids. Like that's one that drives me crazy. For someone to think that they've worked hard enough to spend time with their kids unburdened feels real. And I'm not a parent yet. I'm going to be soon, I hope. But that feels so burdened to me. It feels so dominating of oneself to me. And so that's what I really see. And also in relationships. In relationships, people are often, unfortunately, in adversarial transactional relationships, even in long-term life partnerships and marriages. They're always looking at did I do enough? Did I do more? They're keeping score. They're finding reasons to be able to then justify them asking their partner for what they really want. And that's based on them either being and doing more, or that's based on them positioning their partner in their eyes as doing or being less. It doesn't work. It's not a good look.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a barter. It's an exchange. It's this idea. It's like market. It's like marketing. It's like if you've done enough, you're valuable enough to get something you want, or you can sell yourself in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the like? We do that externally. We do it internally, and there's this sort of a forcing thing going on. What's the alternative?
Yeah. So I really want to focus. You mentioned you'd love to focus on transformative relationship and deeper love that comes from that, and that's what I love to talk about. So I want to share with the audience here what I consider 4 levels of relationship really quick, and then we can dive into transformative relationship, because that's the antidote. Transformative relationship with ourselves and with others is completely the antidote. So, there's often these relationships that happen that are very adversarial. Think about what I just mentioned, the competition, where there's guys that work for the same firm for 6 years and they're always trying to one up each other, and they're always trying to get over on each other, and they consider themselves the enemy, right? Mm-hmm. There's transactional relationships, which many of us have been taught, and many relationships are still actually healthy within a transactional mode. If I'm really busy someday and I don't necessarily have the energy or time to make small talk and really connect with the barista, then that's a transactional relationship in the moment, and that's okay, right? But if I'm doing that same thing with my employees, with my children, with people in my community, where I'm only approaching them when there's something I can get from them, or there's something that I know they need from me, that's a bit of a challenge, that's for sure. And this happens, again, a lot. Scorekeeping in romantic relationships is a killer. The next would be a reciprocal relationship, where it's not based on scorekeeping, but it's about making sure that each person has to match each other's value at all times, right? So there's some subtle scorekeeping. It's coming from mutuality, but there's still some sort of, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And eventually, if we don't do enough for each other, then that's when I no longer want to engage in the relationship. And we do this to ourselves too.
Right. What did you
Finally,
call that?
is that, what's that? Reciprocal.
Reciprocal. Okay. Yeah.
Reciprocal. And reciprocity is great, but relying just on the law of reciprocity with human beings, it always does keep us kind of holding a ledger in some way, or expecting certain things without necessarily asking for them clearly or agreeing to them. Mm. And then finally, with transformative relationships. And transformative relationships are where we create deeper love. They're where we create sustainable change within our own behavior, within our own mindset, within our own bodies. They're where we actually liberate ourselves and liberate our love relationships. And I've even seen people use these concepts to liberate businesses in many ways. And it relies.
I'm just going to slow you down a little bit, because it's a lot of information, right? So I'm pretty good with information. So if I'm struggling a little bit, I want to clarify. Okay. So transactional relationship is about basically like scorekeeping, right? Or you're just having a transaction. There's no real intimacy, right? Yeah. And that works with the barista, but not necessarily in your relationship with your significant other or family or close friends, correct? Yeah. Uh-huh. And then you have reciprocal relationship where, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. The problem with that is if that's all you have, then, when somebody stops scratching somebody else's back, somebody gets upset who wants out of they're not getting enough. Right. And we don't, it doesn't give space for time for people to be different over time, and for life circumstances to have moments where it's like, well, maybe I can't give a lot right now, but if you could take care of me, I'll be there when you need something and you can't provide. Right. And so transformative relationship is about liberation logic. Yeah. Transformative relationship is it's really about having relationships where each party, whether this is within ourselves and different parts of ourselves, or within a romantic relationship, each party can actually get needs met with dignity, with real respect of each other, with real self-love of self. There doesn't need to be a manipulation, because it's relying consistently on 4 pillars. And I'll slow down. Okay. I'll lay the pillars out. That's what I want. I hear you saying it, but I don't know what the mechanism is yet. You're about to tell us the mechanism. Yeah. Okay. So transformative relationship is relationships that are explicitly, consciously built on pillars of vulnerability,
knowing that we are both human beings that need other people. We are both inherently flawed and we make mistakes. We have biases, we have wounds, we need help at times. We can admit when we've made mistakes, we can speak to our own values. And the bottom line is that we build relationships that honor both parties, need each other, and at times are vulnerable. Another pillar is mutuality. We might not bring the same, dish to the party,
Yeah.
but we're each equally valuable for bringing something to the party. We all have our unique strengths. We have our weaknesses. We have our differences. At the end of the day, we balance each other out when we learn to honor and connect through these strengths and weaknesses and opportunities. It's not about my worldview or my values being right or wrong, or yours being right or wrong. It's about both being equally valuable. And when we bring them together, we have more, we create more diversity and strength. And one of my favorites is about really a pillar of consent is co-creation. So it's not about compromise. It's not about negotiation. It's about everyone really bringing their needs, their desires, their wants to the table and being creative to make sure we're never in a zero-sum game. We're never in necessarily a give and take. We're in a co-create. Let's say I have a perfect example of this later if you want to dive into it. And then the last pillar is just something, again, borrowed from very feminist theory, which is use of the erotic, which is about using pleasure in all five senses and embodied experiences and feeling and food and art and music to enrich our minds and our spirits and engage in experiences together that are fundamentally human and no longer trying to control our needs for joy and pleasure and connection, not trying to cap even our struggles and griefs, not trying to cap our elation and our passion, having the whole human, if you will, connected through eros, right? Through full experiencing of the body and intuition and all the other wisdom that's below the head level. So those are some of those pillars, and there's plenty to talk about within that as well too.
Yeah, good. So I'd like to also consider this inside the context of, moving out of a crisis into crushing it, which just means really out of being collapsed in your fear about change and actually stepping fully into the change in a powerful way. I think, especially if you're speaking into, this COVID thing that's happening right now, and then all of what's happening with racism and with the protests. And so there's a much bigger picture here that I didn't originally intend this, summit to be about, but we're in the middle of it, and this is the perfect time to talk about it, right? But these ideas of transforming a relationship and these pillars you're talking about are perfect for what we're in. And how do we move past what we're, experiencing right now? So I love the idea of mutuality, vulnerability, absolutely. You can see where there's no vulnerability in the world right now, where there's definitely a need to dominate happening. And the one I'm really particularly interested in is the radical, what I call it, you said last time you and I talked about radical consent.
Right.
And so what does that mean?
Yeah. So, I've been inspired in many ways by understanding consent at a deeper level. People often have used the language of consent, especially the last few years, to talk about sexual consent. But really, consent is such a broader, respectable, liberated human philosophy of how we can work than just sexual consent, right? But basically, consent meaning that we are being really thoughtful to never keep things hidden. We're being thoughtful, to never keep things hidden if they're part of some sort of way of getting your way, right? To really openly and honestly share our needs, our wants, our desires, to be able to always say yes or no or maybe, or how about a third option, so that essentially, let's say it's me and my partner, right? You know what? Let me just use this example as radical consent as co-creation. A year and a half ago, met the love of my life. We have been co-creating the most liberated and juicy and amazing and loving relationship on so many levels. We're about to move in together. And if you're familiar with attachment styles, I like Totkin's version that he talks about, or I don't know if it's his version, but I last heard it in his books, where he talks about the island, the wave, and the anchor. Well, we're both pretty anchored. We're both pretty stable in our attachment. But at times of insecurity or feeling tired or feeling sick or just being overworried about something, I'm more of the wave. I'm going to crash into things. I want to be with my partner. I want to fight it out. I want to discuss what's going on. I want to get to the bottom of stuff. My partner's more of the island. She needs her alone time. She needs her space. She needs to kind of let herself relax and be unburdened. So with moving in, you know, she's never lived with a partner. She has all these questions. And she openly said to me, hey, sometimes when I've put stress on myself, because she's also a semi-professional cyclist and she's a current PhD candidate, and she's got a really just huge work ethic. So she puts all this pressure on herself. She says, sometimes I just want to be in my room and be alone and be cluttered and have stuff everywhere, right? And just let off the pressure. And she said, I'm worried because Joe, right, talking to me, I love things neat. I like things zen. I don't like to have anything scattered. It's chaotic to me. It's actually triggering of trauma to me from growing up. So she was like, well, I don't know what to do because I might want this, but it's going to be your room. So we came up with this whole strategy where it's like, I get my office and my studio and I get to design it in a way where I'm going to love it. It's totally my space. And so when she needs her alone time to kind of decompress and be in her little moment, she's got it. But then I also said, and what if actually in those moments, it became a time for me to help you feel more taken care of? What if you've never had someone who said, let me take 2 minutes, clean up the environment, let me go make you some tea, and then I'll give you some space. And so this fear that she had about us clashing, if we're getting creative and we're co-creating a better solution than point A or point B or even point C, then we might create something that could even heal that part of her that feels like it kind of needs to hide or needs that time to be just completely cluttered. And so essentially that was a moment where we're talking, and we've had dozens of these over the last month as we're talking about moving in together, is these dozens of these moments where it could either be my side or her side or my needs or her needs. And instead we both take the lead. One of us takes the lead, me or her, and just goes, okay, how do we co-create something even better? How do we heal ourselves through these challenges rather than just keep on doing our own styles of protecting ourselves? Does that make sense for the radical consent is co-creation?
Yeah.
I don't want to force my way. I don't want her to force her way. I believe that we can come up with something where she can fully consent. It's not a compromise, and I can fully consent. It's not a compromise.
I get that now. So the co-creation part. So being creative and coming up with ways that you can consent to something you might not normally, or something you're worried about consenting to, and that you're working that out together. Yeah, I got it. That's a transformative relationship. Yes, absolutely. All right, good. And then use of the erotic. So I think the word erotic can freak some people out. We are sort of a Puritan, at least in the United States, we're sort of a Puritan society. So tell me more about what you mean by that. Like, what is that exactly?
Yeah. So first of all, you're right. There's something about our society that has really distanced ourselves from human pleasure and human sensuality, and decided that pleasure and sensuality and the idea of eros, which is really about life force, is all of a sudden about pornography. Like, is all of a sudden about like dirty sex or something, right?
Right.
That doesn't exist as much in a lot of other cultures. My wonderful partner, she grew up in Berlin. Previous partner was first generation. Her family was Polish, and eros and eroticism and sensuality and even seduction to these women that I've had the pleasure of being with, these are not dirty words. Like, these are really beautiful words that are part of life. And so eros is really life force. And life force is more than just being in our minds, right? So we think a lot. I mean, Western culture is very thinky, and it's very academic, right?
Yeah.
And it's very intellectual. So use of the erotic is really it's about mindfulness, and it's about sensuality. It's about being present enough to really experience all 5 senses. And it's about using different forms of connection to create transformation, to create growth, to create community, to create healing. So, laughter, comedy, art, even just moments. Like, I have a client right now, and he's just a badass. I mean, he's a contractor with the defense. He's with the defense contractor. He does all these, project manages all these proposals. He's a burner. He's in a really healthy polyamorous relationship. He is a CrossFitter. He's a triathlete. He has a side business doing endurance coaching. I mean, he's an amazing dude. But for him, he's so athletic, and he's so connected to art through his like burner society, if you will, and burner lifestyle. But he doesn't necessarily feel all of this. He's not really open to senses and sensuality. And so he is actually missing a lot of the experiences that connect him to his wife, that connect him to coworkers, that connect him to his brother. You're walking on the beach with your brother, and you're just talking, and you're in your head, and the two of you aren't actually connecting over the beauty and the power of the ocean and feeling the magnetic pull and the breeze and the sound. So being more connected to our centers of pleasure and joy and sensuality can be a core piece of creating health and relationship. That's one of the reasons I lost the weight I lost, was I got excited about nature, and I got excited about the feeling of moving my body. And from being a guy who only loved sitting and relaxing if he wasn't standing on a retail sales floor, to being a guy who loved the feeling of a run, of a workout, who loved the feeling of my body moving through space very quickly, as I've fallen in love with cycling in the last year. These are things that actually are using the erotic to transform my relationship to my body, relationship to my mind, and they can transform relationships as well too. I'm a big fan of Esther Perel, and so often when you listen to her podcast where she's counseling couples who've gone through really hard experiences in their relationships, some of her best and most profound coaching is when she just asks one of the partners can you hold her hand and look her in the eye right now? Right? And when she finds out a partner is an artist or sings, she asks them to bring to sing a song for the other partner, to connect through this real experience. And she's tearing up the world of transformation and of relationships right now, and of work too, because her foundational work was about studying speak about crisis to crushing it. Her foundational work was about studying, why is it that some Holocaust survivors, where she grew up in Belgium, why are some of them so alive and so passionate and has so much zest for life? And they're so sensual, and they're going to argue their points. And then there's other Holocaust survivors who just seem like zombies walking dead. So her work is very much about use of the erotic, and about using it to heal relationships, and about using it to understand our own identity and ourselves.
Yeah, I like that. So I'm curious about this, because it can seem like if you say yes to the erotic, you're saying yes to addictions, or you're saying yes to like going over the top with your pleasure, right?
Right.
And so how do you find that balance? Like you're somebody, I mean, if you were overweight, you had to have a thing with food at some point.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so if you're if you're allowing the erotic to move you, what stops you from overindulging?
What stops me is allowing the erotic to move me. So this is a chicken and egg situation. So, you mentioned that you love the concept I talk about, which is unconscious consumption, or being in a creation mode. When I am actually not allowing myself to enjoy sensuality and pleasure, I'm going unconscious to meet that need of my spirit, my body, my soul. And so what ends up happening is I will be really restricted, and I will tell myself that pleasure is not an important part of food. And I can still do this from time to time. I'll get super rigid and put a bunch of rules around myself, and I'll deny my needs for pleasure. So what ends up happening is either I do that for a period of time, and I'm mostly past this, but people do this still all the time. We do that for a period of time, and then we just boomerang. We have this dynamic tension. The body, the mind, the spirit says, pleasure is built in for a reason. So essentially this dynamic tension comes, and you spring back, and you fail, quote unquote, on the diet, and it becomes a binge. People who are very restrictive, it's known that a lot of elite athletes, marathon runners, people doing CrossFit, a lot of the times they're restricting and they're forcing their body so much that it's known inside of the eating disorder world that there's a lot of disordered eating in that world too. There's a lot of binge eating, or there's a lot of
Purging, binge
times
purge, right?
yeah. So essentially, it's because I can be fully connected to my sensuality, my sexuality. I'm not doing unconscious behaviors to feel my needs. I'm conscious and I'm awake because I'm actually maybe once a week going to that bakery I love and really slowing down and savoring and having a mindful spiritual moment with a chocolate croissant, right?
Yeah,
Is the reason that I don't go and eat that pint of ice cream every third night
right.
in the dark, in shame, hiding from my family, because I'm bringing my pleasure into the light rather than keeping it in shadow. I actually have much less need to overindulge. And I believe the same, I wouldn't say the same for certain drugs and alcohol. That's not, it doesn't align. There's too much addiction there. But when it comes to walking in nature and really being open to the sensual experience, I don't think we get addicted to that. I don't know people who just can't do their job anymore because they so love walking by the river. I've gotten close to that, but
Yeah.
I don't think it happens, you know?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. That's good. So thanks for that. Yeah, there's definitely a place. I think there's a lot of fear around pleasure, and
Yeah.
that fear of overindulging. Also, like that you'll stop working because pleasure is so great. You just want to do that all day
Mhm.
long. I mean, I have a little of that going on myself. I'm in a period of my life right now doing this summit. A
Yeah.
summit is a lot of work. It's a lot of, everybody kept telling me that before I started it. And now I'm like, yeah, it's a lot of work.
I've heard.
And so
Thank you.
having
I've
to,
heard.
yeah, having to anchor down and do this. So I haven't been experiencing a lot of pleasure while, over the months of managing this. So, and I know there's probably a better, more balanced way to do it, but I've experienced that thing. And I think a lot of people in the world right now, a lot of my clients, I have a team, a power, what I call my power cluster, which is a group of 8 people that I coach as a team. And I'm coaching them to get clear about their passion, their purpose, their life mission, right? What's their big project in their life, their primary goal, all that stuff,
Yeah.
getting really clear about it, moving forward. But I know in the middle of all of what's happening, so the COVID thing happened in the middle of this team coming together. And so
Mm.
people are like sort of locked in their houses and they're not having experience they normally have. And I think a lot of people are doing what you're talking about. And I know my team struggles with this. I've struggled with it, but of going unconscious and like pleasuring myself unconsciously, like binging on food,
Yeah.
as a way of sort of numbing out the aloneness or numbing out, what's going on right now. I think that's happening a
Sure.
lot. I know a lot of people have put on a ton of weight,
Yeah.
being locked up in the house. So, and the idea of like saying yes to your pleasure as a way of coming out of that is like, it feels counterintuitive, right?
Right.
But it makes sense as you're speaking to it, because that thing in me that wants pleasure is just my joy, right? Wants joy.
Yeah.
It's going to guide me towards joy. And I'm sure it has a way of saying, I've had enough of this now. Let's go over
Yeah.
here, right? But when you're unconscious, it's just like constantly trying to stuff that pain or that hole, right? Stuff it down. So yeah,
Exactly. It's about being conscious in what we create and conscious in what we consume. And we can put that across the board, whether we're talking about food or media or education or our sexuality or our relationships. We often unconsciously consume relationships just because they're there rather than being really connected to what relationships bring real meaning and real pleasure and real joy and real connection and real value. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so moving forward, talking like maybe looking a little closer at applying this to what's happening right now, with people who are maybe in a quarter life crisis. I mean, what
Yeah,
you went through, I would consider quarter life crisis.
totally.
Um, and just to get clear with everybody, I say this, I've been saying this in most of the interviews, but the only real difference between quarter life crisis and midlife crisis is the time that it's happening. It's the same thing, right? But it's
Yep.
tending, you probably see this in your world, but in
Yeah.
your work with men, but it's just that midlife crisis tending to happen earlier and earlier. The reason they call it midlife crisis is because you're at that stage in life where it seems like you're about midway through an average lifetime,
Right.
you start thinking about things like, I'm going to die. Have
Yeah.
I done what I came here to do? What's life about? What am I about? Why am I here? Does any of this that I'm doing matter? Those are things you tend to think about. And then you could get collapsed in that and be like, no, and if you come up with, I don't see how this has a value or how this is anything special in the world. Why am I doing it? Or why am I living my life like this?
Yeah.
That can lead to a collapse, right? And so that's happening earlier and earlier because our society is moving so much faster and there's a lot of switching up. So back in the, like my father's day, you had your job, you stayed in that job with that company for most of your life.
Yeah.
Right now, people are going every 4 or 5 years, whatever, to the next job to go up a level or whatever. And they're getting a lot of experience in a short period of time. And that's leaving a lot of people going, okay, what's the value in this, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't think that's a wrong moment. That's a right moment. Asking that question is never wrong. It can be painful and scary, right?
Yeah.
And so you had it a little earlier in your life than many people have it. And what's happening now is you go through it multiple times. There's not just one midlife crisis. It's like every so many years, you're going to it's time to level up or go up to the next level.
Right.
Don't see it, you get stuck, right? And you're going to be in pain. So knowing that, a lot of people have sort of been moved even quicker into that as a result of what's happening with, the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Right. So you've been forced to back yourself up into your little cubicle, into your house alone, left with time to think about your life. Maybe you're not working right now. It's like, okay, you're going to evaluate. That is what's going to happen.
Right.
So using some of what you do, the information you're talking about, let's talk to people from that perspective. How do you apply this in a way that moves you out of being collapsed into taking action and expanding?
Yeah, absolutely. So the very first, that's totally astute and correct. I believe in what you just shared. We are in a moment where globally change has been thrust upon everybody. There's extraordinary uncertainty about our health, about our security, meaning like our financial well-being as individuals and as nations and globally. It's clearly showing with much more of a magnifying glass the inequities structurally that are set up in our world that are causing a lot of challenge and pain. So right now, almost every human I know and talk to is in some sort of cave of transformation.
Yeah.
Is in that cave, is in that place where the hero's journey, whether we willingly or unconsciously walk in and it's dark and we have to slay some sort of dragon to get out on the other side, to bring the gifts of the crisis back. So first thing is, work on mindset. I let people into some theories that really help frame their work of change. One is simply James Hillman's acorn theory, which is, of course, explaining how all human beings have the capacity for unlimited potential and a tremendous amount of life. But just like acorns, the only acorns that become these powerful, massive oak trees are the ones that actually get blown away and rained on and buried by a squirrel and shat upon. And, the ones that get fertilized are only the ones that ever germinate. So letting people know that when they are in crisis, whether it's crisis that's happening now or whether it's experiences of trauma or challenge or setback or failure from the past, we're going to learn to retool the way you see them. We're going to learn to retool them and look at what you've learned, how you've grown, the opportunities that are showing up. It's about helping people tactically move from the lens of the consumer or even the victim. Sometimes people end up in the victim in the Cartman drama triangle. Very often they're in that drama triangle. It's helping them see the possibilities of being the creator and taking full responsibility and ownership for their life. So that's number one. It's the whole empowerment dynamic that David Emerald has made so popular, especially in the coaching and therapy industry, is moving from the Cartman drama triangle of victim, perpetrator, and rescuer to creator, coach, and challenger. So it's really about how people orient towards and see their challenges. And honestly, good coaching work, as I know is just continuously having the problems that people show up with in their mindset and in their life, and finding ways to keep turning them into projects that move towards possibilities, So really that's it. The problems and the pains, we're just constantly transforming them into projects and possibilities. We're doing that by setting up very consistent practices and processes and experiments so they can actually try new things on through the lens of their own values, their positive beliefs. So I really start with people in getting a foundation. We work deeply on values, understanding their values, values alignment, and deeply on what I call emotional competence, because this could be another interview between us, Mark. Emotional intelligence is not enough. In fact, it's a bunch of BS. And emotional competence moving towards emotional mastery, which is really what we work on. And often my clients, they're in a place where their mind dominates them. They're overthinking, they're overstressed, they're very top heavy, they're extremely intelligent, extremely intellectual. And so thinking linearly, if that's a word, I don't know if that's a word, has become their tool for everything. And so it's allowing them to think with complexity and to feel with their body. And I will train people I work with, whether it's men or women, to actually slow down, feel, do body scans, to do mindful eating, to do slow walks, the things that allow them to actually experience more of their intuition and their full humanity through the body. So they're less anxious, they're less thinking oriented, and they're more using their full experience of emotion and sensation and knowing their values. And a lot of it is just through communication, teaching communication skills and power communication skills in their relationships with their bosses, with the people in their life that matter, their family.
Yeah, thank you for all of that. I think that's a lot, but it's really astute, as you would say, and it's spot on. I like the thing about, you said problems to possibilities to projects.
Yeah.
I think that's the 3 Ps. I'm going to steal that. It's similar to work that I do, but there's a reason you're having the problem, and it's meant to get you somewhere. If you turn it into possibility, then a project, which is active, you're actively manifesting something. I think that's a good place to end this on.
Sure.
Taking your problem, whatever it is right now, thinking about what is the possibility inside that, what is this thing trying to get you to pivot into, and then what big project is what's in my power cluster. We have them come up with their big project.
Yep.
And you have 6 months to establish this big project. If you put your attention on that, that'll suck you right out of crisis and collapse, right into expansion. So yeah.
Exactly. And that's what happened personally for me, because I went through this divorce and I went through this moment where I realized my first career was about to end. And I decided, what's the project? The project is Joe can take ownership of his life. And it's been a project for the last 8 years.
Yeah.
So I love that. Pains and projects pains and problems into possibilities and projects.
Yeah, I like that. Pains. I missed that part. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
So I did the same with this work. That's how I came up with the power cluster. I was doing fine in my work, but I was feeling a real sense of there's more than this to what I do, and it's what is it? And it was this big problem. What's next? And I went on a 9-day fast and meditation every day, and through that process, I got really clear about my next move, which is what I'm doing now with the power clusters. So anyway,
awesome.
Great to talk to you. I love you, brother.
Yeah, man.
You have a lot to offer, a lot to give people. So I'm very excited to speak to you. Let's definitely stay connected. We'll talk again.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the talk, and I'm just glad that you're doing this. Can't wait to hear some of the other interviews.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, man. Take care.